Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
It was one of those rare, perfect Saturdays in early May, where the sun feels warm but not intrusive, and even the air seems like it knows it's a special day. My best friend Jess had pulled together this gorgeous bridal shower in a cozy garden patio behind our favorite cafe. There were pale yellow roses in mason jars, a table stacked with tiny lemon tarts, and charcuterie boards that looked like they belonged in a magazine. And everywhere you turned, there was laughter and wine and a sense that things were falling into place just right. And for the first hour or so, they were. I remember holding a glass of sparkling rosé, smiling while my Aunt Gwen told me a very inappropriate story about her wedding night. When I saw my sister Lena walk in, a little too fast, a little too late, with her signature entrance that always said, "This moment is mine now." She was wearing a white sundress, white, which, let's be real, is just the oldest move in the book when it's not your party, and her hair was curled like she'd just walked off a shampoo commercial. She looked around like she was measuring the room's temperature, then locked eyes with me and beelined over with that tight little smile she does when she's gearing up for something. And right then, something in my stomach turned. I should have known. Lena hugged me, all performative and warm, but when she pulled back, her voice dropped to that sharp whisper she always used when she wanted to sting but keep it private. "You didn't answer my text," she said, all sugar-coated venom. I blinked. "Which one?" "The one where I asked if you were sure about Jess being your maid of honor." And there it was, the crack in the wall I'd built around this whole day. I glanced toward Jess, who was laughing with my cousin near the champagne table, completely unaware that the air had just shifted. "I did answer, weeks ago, Lena. I said I was sure." Lena tilted her head like she was being patient with a toddler. "But I thought maybe you'd change your mind. I mean, I'm your sister. And Jess has been my best friend for over 20 years. It's not about—" "But I'm your sister," she repeated, louder this time, and people turned. Just a few at first, but enough. Enough for the moment to slide from intimate to performative, just how she liked it. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Lena, this isn't the time." "Oh, I see. So you don't want to talk about how you chose someone else to stand beside you at the altar over your own blood? That's not wedding talk enough for you?" The whole patio was quiet now. Even the birds seemed to take a breath. I could feel Jess looking over, and I hated that I was standing in the middle of a party that was meant to be about love and light and being surrounded by the people who supported me, when all I felt was that familiar tightness in my chest that always came from trying not to make Lena feel bad. I reached out, trying to lead her away from the crowd, but she yanked her arm back. "I just don't get why I'm always last in your life," she said, her voice cracking. Not with sadness, but that specific kind of indignation that sounds rehearsed. "You're always the strong one, the one who doesn't need anything. Well, guess what, Claire? I needed this." People shifted uncomfortably. Someone cleared their throat. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, I felt a hand on my back. It was my mother. "Claire," she said under her breath, "just let her have it. She's more fragile than you." That line, that exact line, I'd heard versions of it all my life. "She's going through more. She's not as emotionally strong as you. She doesn't have what you have. Be caught, be patient, be understanding, always me bending, always me adjusting, and always Lena somehow in the center of the room, even if she had to burn everything down to get there." I looked at my mom, then at Lena, who was already blinking away fake tears like she was auditioning for a Hallmark movie. And I did the only thing I could do in that moment that wouldn't make me the villain. I smiled. I turned back to the group and lifted my glass. "Everyone," I said, "I just want to say how grateful I am that you're all here today. It means the world to me. And I guess there's been a last-minute change. Lena will be standing beside me as maid of honor." There was scattered applause. Jess's smile faltered just a second before she joined in. Lena beamed like she'd just won something, which, in a way, she had. Mom sighed with relief, and I stood there smiling, feeling like I'd just handed over a piece of myself I might never get back. But somewhere beneath that smile, something else was settling in me. Not sadness, not resignation, something colder, cleaner. Because in that moment, I decided something I hadn't dared to consider until right then. She could have this one. Sure, let her bask in the title. Let her preen and soak up the spotlight. But on the day that really mattered, the day she thought she'd stand beside me at the altar like some kind of conquering hero, I would remind her, in the clearest way possible, that this wasn't her story. It was mine. And I'd been silent long enough. There's something strange that happens when you grow up being labeled the strong one. People think it's a compliment, and maybe in some ways it is, but the cost, it's high. It means you get overlooked when you're hurting. It means your pain doesn't count the same. And more than anything, it means you get used to swallowing things whole, pretending they didn't stick in your throat. That Saturday night, after the shower, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, slicing the air like it was trying to keep me from thinking. But it didn't work. My mind was replaying everything, my mother's voice, Lena's smug little smirk when I made the announcement, and Jess's face, trying not to look betrayed. And under it all, that ancient ache was back, the one I thought I'd finally buried somewhere under adulthood and therapy. Growing up, Lena and I were close in that way sisters are, when you don't know yet that people aren't always what they seem. She was 2 years older, and I idolized her at first. She had this chaotic sparkle, like she was always about to say something wildly inappropriate, or brilliant, or both. She was the girl who skipped class and somehow still passed, who convinced Mom to let her go to parties I never even dared ask about, who wore eyeliner in 7th grade and stole glances from boys I didn't know how to talk to. And the thing was, she needed people around her, needed attention like it was oxygen. And when she didn't get it, she found ways to take it. There were early warning signs, I guess, moments I ignored, because that's what you do when you love someone who makes things difficult. Like when I made the varsity soccer team as a freshman and my parents were so proud until Lena faked an anxiety attack that night and Mom spent the whole evening in her room. Or the time I got into my first real relationship in college and Lena flew into a jealous rage because I didn't answer her call one night, telling me I was abandoning her just like everyone else. At the time, I wrote it off as her going through something. That was the phrase our family always used. Lena was going through something. She always was. I don't think I ever fully realized the weight I carried until much later. Until I started noticing how often my own feelings were dismissed. How many birthdays or holidays ended with me apologizing for something I didn't do, just to keep the peace. It became this quiet ritual, like washing dishes after a family meal no one thanked you for. You do it because it's expected, because you're the strong one, the capable one, the one who can handle it. It wasn't until a few years ago, when Lena's marriage collapsed after only 11 months, that I began to feel something shift. She moved back home temporarily, and my mom's house became a museum of emotional landmines. I remember coming over one night to drop off groceries and hearing Lena in the kitchen, crying to our mother. Claire has everything, the job, the guy, the picture-perfect life. I had nothing. She said it like I'd stolen something from her, like my stability was a weapon I had aimed at her heart. And the worst part? Mom didn't disagree. She just said, "She's built different, sweetheart. You always felt more." I wish I could say that was the moment I stood up for myself, that I barged in and said, "No more," but I didn't. I sat in the car afterward, hands gripping the steering wheel, teeth clenched so hard my jaw ached, and I drove home in silence, wondering what it would take for someone in my family to finally ask me how I was doing. And now here we were, a week before my wedding, a bridal shower hijacked, Jess heartbroken, me fuming in silence again. I texted her later that night, telling her I was sorry, that I'd explain everything soon. She sent back a single word. Okay. No heart emoji, no reassurance, just that dry, cautious distance people use when they're not sure they can trust you anymore. The next morning, I went over to my mom's to drop off some seating charts. Lena was already there, barefoot in the kitchen, eating from a bowl of cereal like she'd never wrecked anything. She looked up, smiled like everything was normal, and asked me how the shower cleanup went. I stared at her for a second, wondering if she even understood what she'd done, if she felt the ripple of damage behind her like everyone else did. But her eyes were clear. calm, like the villain in a soap opera, who truly believes she's the hero. Mom came in a few minutes later, brushing flour off her hands like some wholesome matriarch. "So glad you let that little drama go, Claire. It meant a lot to Lena, and I know it was hard for you, but you did the right thing." The right thing. Always that phrase. Always that moral leash around my neck. After I left, I sat in the car with the windows rolled up and the engine off. The silence felt heavier than it should have. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror and finally asked myself something I hadn't dared to ask before. What if being the right one had actually been ruining me this whole time? I thought of Jess, of how she'd always been there for me through breakups and job changes and the time my car died on the interstate, and she drove 2 hours just to bring me a battery and a milkshake. She had earned that spot beside me. She deserved to hold the bouquet, not because of loyalty or history, but because she'd shown up every damn time. And suddenly something inside me clicked. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about Lena anymore. It was about truth. About taking back the moment that was supposed to be mine and putting it in the hands of the person who had truly earned it. I called Jess that afternoon. She picked up on the third ring. "Hey," I said, "I need to talk to you, and I need you to trust me." There was a pause. Then her voice came through the speaker, low and steady. "Claire, whatever you're planning, I just hope it's not about making a scene." I smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile people saw. It was the kind you feel behind your teeth when something's already in motion, something inevitable. "It's not a scene," I said. "It's a correction." Because I'd spent my whole life being told to bend, to yield, to make room for someone else's chaos. But this time I wasn't bending. I was building something else entirely, and I knew exactly when it would all come together. At the altar, where everyone would be watching, where the real story would finally begin. The rehearsal dinner was held at a quiet, rustic inn just outside the city, one of those old brick places with creaky floors, antique chandeliers, and the kind of warmth that feels like it was baked into the walls a century ago. It was Jess's idea to have it there. She said it would feel intimate, like something from a storybook, and in a way, it did. The tables were set with long linen runners. Soft candlelight flickered off glassware, and the smell of roast chicken and rosemary butter drifted through the space like something that belonged to another world. From the outside, everything looked perfect. And maybe if I had been someone else, someone not tethered to a lifetime of family imbalance, maybe I could have just enjoyed it for what it was, a celebration of love, a last night before vows and veils and forever. But I wasn't that woman, and I never had been. Lena arrived late again, as expected. Her hair was in an elaborate updo, clearly styled by a professional, and she wore a dress far too formal for a rehearsal. Deep green, low-cut, backless, dramatic in a way that screamed for attention without ever needing to ask. As she made her entrance, people turned. They always did. And Lena soaked it in like she was stepping onto a stage. She had this way of making any space hers within seconds, as if the air shifted to accommodate her. When she reached me, she kissed both my cheeks like we were debutantes at a ball instead of sisters preparing for a family dinner, and whispered, "You're glowing. That's good. Brides should glow, even if they don't always feel it." I didn't answer. I just nodded and smiled. That polite, dead-eyed smile I'd perfected over decades. The one that told people nothing. Dinner moved slowly, with speeches and wine and the soft clinking of forks against plates. Mark, my fiancé, gave a simple, lovely toast about how grateful he was to have found someone who understood the difference between love and convenience. His words warmed the room, made even the most cynical of our friends lean in a little. For a moment, I almost forgot what was sitting across the table from me. But then Lena stood up. She hadn't been scheduled to speak, and no one had asked her to, but there she was, rising to her full height like she was about to receive an award. "I just wanted to say a few words," she began, raising her glass with a practiced smile. Being asked to be maid of honor was a surprise, a really emotional one. Claire and I haven't always been close in the way sisters should be, But that's what makes this so special. It's proof that we've healed, that we've grown. I could feel Mark stiffen beside me. He didn't like performances, and he especially didn't like ones that rewrote history while pretending to honor it. Lena continued. Claire's always been the organized one, the achiever, the person who gets things done and doesn't let herself fall apart, even when she probably should. And me, I'm the opposite. I feel everything, maybe too much. She paused here, her voice softening like she was letting us in on some great, raw vulnerability. But that's what makes us a team, right? Her strength, my heart. There was a small ripple of polite laughter, the kind people give when they're unsure if something is sincere or just weirdly uncomfortable. I stared at her, wondering if she believed any of it, or if she'd just memorized it like a monologue. Her eyes flicked over to Jess, who was watching from the far end of the table, her expression unreadable, but her fingers tightly curled around the stem of her wine glass. After the toast, people mingled, drifted toward the dessert table or out to the small garden patio, and I found myself slipping away too, needing air, needing space. I was halfway through a glass of water and mentally counting down the minutes until we could leave when Jess appeared beside me. "You okay?" she asked, leaning against the railing, her voice low. "I will be," I replied, not looking at her. I didn't have the strength to pretend anymore. Jess exhaled slowly. I wasn't going to say anything. I was just going to play along like always. But after that little speech, that was something. She always makes it sound like she's overcome some tragic loss, like our entire childhood was a war zone she barely survived, I said, my voice quiet but edged. As if I wasn't there too. Jess looked at me then, really looked. You've never asked her to acknowledge your side. You've always just cleaned up the messes and kept going. Because someone had to, I said, and for the first time, I felt the anger behind the words like heat rising from under my skin. Someone had to make things work. There was a long pause before Jess spoke again. Claire, I don't know what you're planning, but I want you to think really carefully, because you're not the only one who'll get hurt if this goes sideways. I finally turned toward her, my eyes locking onto hers. You think I'm going to make a scene? Jess didn't blink. I think you're capable of it. But more than that, I think you finally realize that keeping the peace has cost you more than it's ever given you. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because Jess, more than anyone, knew what I was thinking before I said it out loud. She looked down at her shoes, then back up at me with something softer in her eyes. Whatever it is, I just hope you do it for the right reasons. I tilted my head slightly, considering her words. I'm not looking to humiliate her, I said finally. I'm just done pretending. And if that feels like an attack to her, maybe that says more about her than it does about me. Jess didn't respond right away. Then she offered a half smile, the kind she gave me when she didn't agree but respected where I was coming from. Just give me a front row seat, she said. If you're going to light a match, I at least want to see the fire. I nodded slowly, my eyes drifting back toward the inn's warm windows, and the laughter that spilled from them like something that didn't belong to me anymore. You'll get one, I said, at the altar. And right then I felt it settle, this quiet, deliberate certainty. Not rage, not bitterness, just a calm decision that this time I wouldn't fold. This time the story wouldn't be hers to tell. This time I was writing the ending. The morning of the wedding began in a soft, deceptive kind of silence, the kind that settles over a house just before something cracks. The air was still, the sky was smeared with a pale blue that looked too serene to trust, and my makeup artist kept telling me how calm I seemed. But the truth was I wasn't calm. I was composed. And there's a big difference. Composure, I've learned, is not peace. It's restraint. It's the fine art of not letting the storm inside you leak through your smile, especially when everyone expects you to look your best, feel your best, be your best. So I did. I looked like a bride from a wedding magazine. My dress, ivory satin with a low back and a delicate trail of beading down the sleeves. fit like it had been stitched to my body by someone who understood what I wanted to say without ever asking me to say it. I wore my mother's pearl earrings. I let the florist talk me into a slightly larger bouquet. I posed for the photos. I played the part. Every moment was curated and beautiful and hollow. When Lena arrived, nearly 45 minutes late, no one seemed surprised. She swept into the bridal suite like a storm pretending to be sunlight, her curls perfectly in place, her makeup heavier than necessary for a daytime ceremony, her smile rehearsed to the point of being eerie. She flung her arms around me with the exaggerated warmth of a reality TV reunion and squealed about how gorgeous everything looked. Her voice was too loud, her perfume too strong. And when she looked at me, it wasn't as a sister would look at a bride on her wedding day. It was as a rival would look at someone who'd just stolen the spotlight she thought belonged to her. Jess stood quietly off to the side, sipping black coffee and watching Lena, with the detached curiosity of someone observing a tiger in a glass enclosure. She hadn't said much all morning, just offered to run interference if Lena started getting difficult, which was her polite way of saying, "Let me know when it's time." The ceremony was held in the garden of an old estate about 20 minutes outside the city, a place with arched stone doorways and ivy climbing up the walls like time itself was trying to get inside. Rows of wooden chairs were lined up along a white linen aisle. Soft string music drifted from a quartet in the corner, and the guests began to gather, all dressed in muted pastels and well-practiced smiles. From the outside, it looked like a fairy tale. But inside me, something far more deliberate was unfolding. Lena, in her role as maid of honor, had spent the last hour fluttering about, making a show of adjusting my train, powdering her nose in the mirror beside mine, telling anyone who would listen how emotional this day was for her. She was performing grief for a version of herself she believed had been wronged, sacrificed on the altar of my perceived perfection. And no one stopped her. No one told her to sit down or be quiet or let the bride have her moment. Because they never had. Because that wasn't the dynamic we lived in. Not in our family, not in the narrative she'd built over the years. I was the one who could handle things. And Lena, she was the fragile one, the misunderstood one, the girl who cried first and blamed second and broke hearts while still convincing everyone she was the victim. As the ceremony began, I could feel the weight of eyes on me. I knew what they were seeing, the beautiful bride, poised and serene, walking down the aisle toward a man who loved her with a kind of steadiness that made every chaotic part of her life feel like it could finally make sense. Mark stood there, taut and calm, his eyes fixed on me in that way he always did, like he knew I was thinking something I wasn't saying and loved me for it anyway. And as I reached the altar, I felt the script of this day settling around me like a garment too tight across the shoulders. I took his hand. We exchanged the words everyone expected. And then it was time for the maid of honor's role. Lena stepped forward, took her place beside me, and looked out at the crowd with a glowing sense of entitlement. The officiant asked if anyone would like to say a few words. Lena opened her mouth, already holding a folded piece of paper, probably full of half-truths and theatrical pauses. But before she could speak, I turned to her. "Lena," I said gently but firmly, "I want to thank you for being here today, for showing up." She looked confused, the paper still in her hand. "And I want to take a moment," I continued, turning slightly toward the guests, "to acknowledge someone else. Someone who, from the beginning, has been there for me not just in words, but in action. Someone who's answered my midnight phone calls, sat with me on bathroom floors after breakups, shown up with takeout on the days I forgot how to eat, and reminded me, over and over again, that love is something you give without keeping score." People began shifting in their seats. I could see the confusion in their faces, like the air had suddenly changed temperature. "I'd like to ask Jess to come up here," I said, my voice steady. There was a brief pause, the kind that feels longer than it is. Jess froze for a moment, her eyes wide. Then she slowly stood. She looked at me, then at Lena, then at my mother, who had already started rising slightly in her seat, as if to stop it. as if she could undo what was already in motion, but she didn't say a word. "Jess," I said as she approached, "this was always supposed to be you." I turned back to Lena. "You were given a role you didn't earn, because I was told to be the stronger one, to keep the peace, to sacrifice a little piece of myself, again, for your comfort, but not today." Lena's lips parted like she might interrupt, but I continued. "I love you, Lena, but love doesn't mean surrender, and it sure as hell doesn't mean silence." I gently removed the bouquet from her hands and passed it to Jess, who took it without speaking, her hands trembling just slightly. She stood beside me, where she had always belonged. There were no gasps, no applause, just the quiet hum of something unspoken becoming visible. Lena didn't say anything. Her mouth moved, then closed, then opened again, but no sound came. Her face twisted, not in pain, not in sadness, but in disbelief, like she'd just watched a story being rewritten in real time and couldn't understand how she wasn't the main character anymore. And then, without a word, she turned and walked down the aisle, past the rows of stunned faces, her heels clicking against the stones like punctuation marks in a sentence that was finally ending. She stormed out, not dramatically, not with tears, just gone, like she had been erased from the page she thought she owned. I looked at Jess. She gave the smallest nod, like she understood what this cost me. Mark squeezed my hand. And in that strange stillness, I smiled, not with triumph, but with relief. Because for the first time in my life, I had chosen myself, not the version of me that had been trained to please, but the real me. And I knew the silence Lena left behind would echo louder than any words she could have spoken. After the ceremony ended, and the applause finally faded into murmurs and shuffling feet, the guests began to make their way toward the cocktail tent, casting long glances in my direction, some curious, some admiring, and a few laced with the kind of judgment that only comes from people who are too uncomfortable to admit they enjoyed what they just witnessed. The sun had started to dip behind the trees, and a golden light fell across the lawn, stretching shadows across the gravel path and painting everything in this strange, unreal glow that made the entire moment feel like something suspended between dream and memory. For the first time in what felt like hours, maybe even days, I let my shoulders drop, just slightly, as if I had been holding up some invisible structure and only now realized that maybe, just maybe, it was okay to let it settle. Mark leaned in and whispered something into my ear, something quiet and simple, just enough to pull me back into the moment, but my mind was already slipping sideways, still replaying Lena's face as she turned and left, still trying to decide if what I'd done had been brave or cruel or something messier in between. I could feel the tension vibrating through the crowd like an aftershock, like everyone had been waiting for the drama to explode and now didn't know what to do with the silence that followed. I didn't see my mother until nearly 20 minutes later. She found me near the edge of the reception space, tucked between two flower-covered arches where I had been trying to collect myself before the photographer pulled me back for more staged laughter and veil-tossing. She walked toward me in that deliberate way of hers, shoulders squared, jaw set, like she had already written the script for what she was about to say and wasn't going to deviate from it. She didn't hug me. She didn't say congratulations. She looked at me with eyes that weren't angry, but disappointed in that quiet, aching way that can make a person feel like they've set fire to a childhood home. Her voice was low but firm when she spoke. "You didn't have to humiliate her like that, Claire. Not on your wedding day." I took a deep breath and tried to meet her gaze, but something in me flinched. I had expected this confrontation, prepared for it even, but the reality of it still cut deeper than I'd like to admit. "I didn't humiliate her," I said, my voice level but far from calm. "I just told the truth she's been twisting for years." Mom shook her head slowly, like she was trying to understand, but couldn't quite find a path through her own expectations. She was trying. She showed up. That should have meant something. "She showed up late," I said, in a white dress with a speech about herself, and a lifetime of pretending that everything she ruins is just a symptom of her being fragile. I didn't raise my voice, but I didn't soften it either. I wanted her to hear the exhaustion behind my words, the ache that had been growing for more years than I could count, the weight of always being asked to carry someone else's chaos while being expected to remain composed and generous and endlessly forgiving. You always ask me to give her space, to make allowances, to let things go because she's the one who's hurting, but you never ask her to stop hurting people. My mother looked away for a moment, then back at me, and in her silence I could see something cracking. Not necessarily agreement, but maybe recognition. Maybe the faintest hint of understanding that the roles she'd assigned us long ago were no longer serving anyone. She left crying, she finally said, almost to herself. Yes, I replied, but for once they were her tears, not mine. There was no victory in that moment, no surge of righteousness or relief, just a long, quiet breath where two women who had loved the same broken family in very different ways finally stood on opposite sides of a truth too long denied. I turned away first, not out of disrespect, but because I had nothing left to give that conversation. There was no apology I would offer, and no absolution I would ask for. Not today. The rest of the reception unfolded like a strange, dreamy echo of the chaos that had come before. Guests ate, danced, toasted with careful words. Some avoided eye contact. A few offered knowing smiles, quiet nods of approval from those who had witnessed enough family dysfunction in their own lives to recognize that sometimes what looks like cruelty is actually survival. Jess stayed close, never saying much but always nearby. Like a lighthouse in a storm I wasn't sure was fully over. When she hugged me goodbye, her arms lingered just a moment too long, and I knew it wasn't just about the wedding. It was about all the other days that had led us here, about the loyalty that doesn't need ceremony or title. I didn't say thank you. I didn't need to. She already knew. Later that night, after the guests were gone, and Mark had fallen asleep beside me, his arm draped across my waist, in the kind of quiet reassurance that doesn't demand words, I sat alone on the edge of the hotel room bed with my phone in my hand. I opened the text thread with Lena, unsure of what I was looking for. I didn't expect an apology, and I wasn't prepared to offer one, but part of me needed to see if the silence between us had taken root, or if it was just the pause before another storm. There was one message, just one. Sent an hour earlier. You ruined everything, again, no context. No greeting, just those 5 words, each of them heavy with blame, as if I had once again committed the unforgivable sin of choosing myself over her needs. I stared at the screen for a long time before locking the phone and setting it down on the nightstand. I didn't respond. I didn't cry. I didn't scream or pace the room or draft a speech about boundaries and healing and family. I just sat there, my dress still hanging over the back of the chair, the bouquet already wilting in a vase across the room, and I asked myself one question. Had I been cruel, or had I simply stopped pretending? Because there's a line we all walk, especially in families like mine, between grace and surrender, between empathy and erasure. And for too long, I had confused love with endurance, thinking that to care meant to suffer quietly. But that night, for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to apologize for stepping off that line, for reclaiming my place in my own story. Maybe Lena would come around, maybe she wouldn't. Maybe my mother would call in a week, asking me to make peace, asking me to do what I always did, patch things up, say the right words, smooth the jagged edges of someone else's damage. But if that call came, I already knew what I'd say. Not this time, because love, real love, doesn't ask you to disappear. And I had finally decided that being strong didn't mean being silent. It meant knowing when to speak, and knowing, most of all, when to stop swallowing the things that were never mine to carry in the first place.